In recent weeks, Ukraine has intensified its attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, in particular its major oil refineries. Spectacular footage of apocalyptic fires caused by strikes on the oil ports at Primorsk and Ust-Luga in the Leningrad Oblast made international headlines. Satellite footage later confirmed major damage at both locations. These strikes have been a serious blow to the Russian war machine. Why? Because hitting Russia's oil exports is hitting its military where it hurts, in the wallet. In addition to the Primorsk and Ust-Luga strikes, Ukraine has also carried out further strikes on two other Russian refineries, Kirishi Nefteorgsyntez, or KINEF for short, located in the city of Kirishi, Leningrad Oblast, and Yaroslavl Nefteorgsyntez, or YANOS, situated in the city of Yaroslavl in the oblast of the same name. The attacks could cause the Russian military to grind to a halt, but for completely mechanical and not financial reasons. Here's what Ukraine hit, and why the strikes are such a major blow to the Kremlin. The Kirishi Nefteorgsyntez and Yaroslavl Nefteorgsyntez refineries are both roughly 430 to 435 miles away from the nearest Ukrainian border. But these aren't just any old refineries. Russia has at least 50 refineries in total, highlighting just how vast the country's oil industry is. KINEF is considered to be the second largest, and YANOS the fourth. The two refineries have an estimated output of around 380,000 and 300,000 barrels of oil per day, respectively. Russia's total refining capacity is estimated at around 6.5 to 6.6 million barrels per day. So, Russia loses a little over 10% of its total refining capacity every day these two refineries are out of commission. That's huge. Since Ukraine strikes on these facilities in late March, both facilities appear to be completely offline. It's approaching a week without any output at all, with no timeline for restoration of operations. Coupled with the strikes on the nearby Primorsk and Ust-Luga oil export hubs, Russia is losing massive revenues from oil exports. And it's all coming at the wrong time. Worldwide, the price of oil has been skyrocketing as a result of Iran's closing of the Straits of Hormuz in response to the attacks by the US and Israel. Around 20% of the global oil trade passes through these straits, and their closure, a month and counting, has caused what some have dubbed the greatest oil supply shock in history. The problem is so acute that the US has temporarily lifted sanctions on oil exports from Russia and even Iran to try and plug the gap. Russian President Vladimir Putin had been salivating at the prospect of a massive demand for Russian oil to cover the shortfall, especially at 2 to 3 times the price it had been able to obtain previously. But the opposite is happening. At current prices, he's losing anywhere from $50 to $100 million per day as a result of the combined strikes on these two refineries and the hubs that ship the oil they produce. That's got to hurt. But these strikes on KINEF and YANOS have given him an even bigger headache, because these two refineries don't just output a standard product range consisting of a few different grades of fuel. They also produce the bulk of Russia's specialized industrial oils, including those used heavily by the military. That means if Ukraine can put them out of commission permanently, Putin's war machine will increasingly grind to a standstill, if not seize up completely. There is technically a third refinery that outputs the industrial oils that the Russian military needs to keep moving. The Lukoil Volgograd Nefte Perera-Bodka refinery in Volgograd. With an output of 280,000 to 300,000 barrels per day, around 5% of Russia's total refining output, it's the largest refinery in Russia's southern federal district. However, that's also been repeatedly pummeled by Ukraine. Ukraine has struck the plant 9 times. The last strike on the evening of February 11 damaged a key crude distillation unit that accounts for about 40% of its capacity, forcing a full suspension of operations. As of the end of March, the facility remains offline, and no restart timeline has been provided. So there's scant relief for Putin there then. The Volgograd plant specializes in deep refining, with an output of standard diesel fuel and gasoline, along with specialist fuels like aviation kerosene, fuel oil, bitumen, and lubricants. And many of those are critical for the Russian military. You can't keep fighter jets and strategic bombers in the air without aviation fuel. And you can't keep armored vehicles, mobile air defense systems, and artillery rolling without the necessary lubricants for their many critical moving parts. For Putin, this isn't just double, but triple the trouble. As the nation's second-largest refinery, KINEF has a range of around 80 different products. These include motor gasolines, diesel fuels, jet fuel, fuel oils, petroleum bitumens, liquefied petroleum gas, petroleum aromatics and solvents, petroleum paraffins, sulfuric acid, sulfur, and more. Crucially, the plant also produces virtually all grades of jet fuel for both civilian and combat aviation. That includes TS1, T1, T1S, T2, and RT aviation fuel types. The most commonly used is TS1, which is considered comparable to Western Jet A1. This is the standard kerosene-type jet fuel used in most Russian military and civilian aircraft. It's known for its enhanced cold weather performance with a very low freezing point of -58 degrees Fahrenheit. RT, sometimes called PT, as that's the way it appears in the Cyrillic alphabet, is a superior grade of TS1. It's often described as a unified Russian fuel for subsonic and supersonic aircraft. RT is a hydro-treated product with higher quality specifications and is used by supersonic combat aircraft like the Su-30 for missions where fuel can heat up. So, every day that KINEF stays offline starves the Russian Air Force of the crucial fuels it needs to keep its fighters and bombers in the air. It's unknown what size reserves of these specialist fuels Russia holds, but the pace of operations in Ukraine suggests they won't last long. But Putin's problems from a persistently offline KINEF don't just end with aviation fuels. KINEF is the only refinery explicitly identified as a producer of F5 and F12 marine fuel oils for the Russian Navy. These oils are critical for keeping large naval vessels, like the steam-powered aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov, and Project 956 Sovremennye-class destroyers moving. While KINEF might be a larger plant, with a 26% greater output than YANOS, the Ukrainian strikes on the latter are likely to be even more consequential for the Russian military. YANOS is a strategic refinery, supplying fuel to Russia's Central Federal District, Moscow, and covering the needs of the Russian Ministry of Defense. But it's also Russia's leading producer of a specialized range of oils and lubricants, with a processing capacity of 15 million tons of oil per year. Its main products include motor gasolines, diesel fuel, jet fuel, heating fuel oil, bitumens of road, roofing and construction grades, paraffin wax products, aromatic hydrocarbons, along with base, compressor, transmission, and industrial oils. In particular, YANOS is the only producer of a specialized Arctic diesel fuel developed to meet a unique standard by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Effective down to -85 degrees Fahrenheit, the fuel achieves its extreme low-temperature performance without additives. It relies instead on advanced refining processes like iosode waxing to ensure operability in Arctic and Antarctic conditions. In addition, the turbine, industrial, compressor, and transmission oils and lubricants produced at YANOS are widely used in military and special-purpose equipment. So are the base oils used for the further production of lubricants and oils with special properties. In particular, YANOS produces oils and lubricants for the engines and transmissions of T-90M, T-72B3M, and T-62 tanks, the entire line of Russian armored vehicles and armored personnel carriers, heavy multi-axle Plataforma O transporters used to transport strategic missile systems, transport loading vehicles of the Strategic Missile Forces, heavy KAMAZ Ural trucks, engineering equipment, and special military equipment. But it doesn't end there. YANOS also produces oils for T-80U BVM tanks equipped with gas turbine units and the hydraulic systems and drives of the Buk, Tor, and Pantsir air defense missile system families, along with oils and lubricants for gas turbine units on Russian Navy ships. The plant also produces gearbox oils for MI and KA series attack helicopters, as well as for the turboprop engines and gearboxes of the Tu-95 MS strategic bomber. Again, it's unclear how deep Russia's reserves of these critical oils and lubricants are, if it has any at all. But one thing's for sure, every day YANOS remains crippled, the greater the likelihood that across the full gamut of operations, core components of Russia's war machine simply seize up. If Russian tanks are already performing well below expectations, imagine them without lubricated engines. As recent Ukrainian strikes have proven, Russia's air defenses are already creaking under the increasing intensity of Ukraine's strikes. Imagine how leaky they'd be without being able to physically move systems like the Pantsir into place to repel strikes. Fortunately, the conflict in Ukraine has not yet gone nuclear, so we haven't seen the RS-24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missile system in action. But even if it did, With the Plataforma O, also known as the KAMAZ 7850 transporter family out of action, Russia's ability to use the Yars would be severely limited. The 12x12 and 16x16 variants of the Plataforma O serve as a transporter erector launchers or TELs for the RS-24 Yars. Now, if you're tired of seeing the same news regurgitated across all your news sources, you're in the right place. Here at the Military Show, we don't just dig underneath the military headlines, we explain why they matter. So hit that subscribe button to ensure you always have your finger on the pulse. Now, it's not just the land-based component of Russia's nuclear triad that's compromised by the YANOS refinery being taken offline for extended periods. The aerial component of the triad also comes under threat with each passing day that the refinery remains non-operational. The Tu-95MS is one of Russia's main strategic bombers, with around 47 in active service and a further 13 or so airframes in storage, likely unusable except for parts. The fleet was severely degraded during last year's daring Operation Spiderweb. Approximately 6 to 8 Tu-95MS were destroyed, and another severely damaged during those strikes on the Olenia and Belaya air bases where they were parked. Russia can ill afford to lose even more. The Tu-95MS carries the KH-102 nuclear cruise missile, KH-55 long-range nuclear-capable cruise missile, and the KH-15 shorter-range air-launch missile with nuclear capabilities. It also carries and regularly terrorizes Ukraine with conventional KH-101 cruise missiles. But the bomber has to be airborne to launch its missiles, and that isn't going to happen if its turboprop engines and gearboxes can't be effectively lubricated because the refinery that produces the necessary oil is up in smoke. Now, while it's unclear how long it will take for operations at the two major refineries to be restored, it's highly unlikely that they've been taken offline permanently. These are massive facilities, with YANOS occupying 809.1 hectares of process facilities. So, a few strikes, especially with long-range drones carrying relatively small payloads, simply aren't enough to obliterate such a huge plant. Which is why Ukraine is focusing on quantity, not necessarily quality. Ukraine strikes the facilities regularly. The damage progressively adds up, and so do the cost of both repairs and lost revenues from disrupted output. The March 28 strikes on YANOS in Yaroslavl are the second major strike on the facility. The first, on December 12, 2025, damaged the AVT-4 unit, which accounts for about a third of its capacity, and the oil loading rack. Like the March strikes, industry sources confirmed a complete suspension of output after the strike, although at least some production had been restored before the second strike. Similarly, the March 26 strike on KINEF caused a fire and damaged two main processing units, ELOU AVT-4 and ELOU AVT-6, forcing KINEF to halt all operations. Production facilities for petroleum bitumen, the heaviest residue from crude oil processing, and key crude oil processing units and gas fractionation units used to separate light gases after crude oil is refined were also damaged. It was the sixth time the refinery had been hit, with some of the previous hits confirmed on March 8, September 14, and October 4, 2025. On March 8, 2025, Russian authorities claimed that a Ukrainian drone was shot down over the refinery by Russian air defenses. According to the governor of Leningrad Oblast, Alexander Drozdenko, debris from the drone damaged the external structure of one of the storage tanks. He reported a similar story following the September 14 strike, stating that Russian air defense had intercepted 3 drones in the Kurishi area, with wreckage from a downed drone crashing on the site of the refinery, igniting a fire. The fire had been extinguished and there were no casualties, he said. Nonetheless, Reuters reported that the attack forced a halt in production at a key processing unit at the refinery, responsible for nearly 40% of the plant's production capacity. Reuters sources reported that a furnace at the unit, as well as other equipment, was damaged in the strike, forcing production to be halted. Repairs were anticipated to take a month. But Ukraine was far from done with the unfortunate plant. Just 3 weeks later, on October 4, they were at it again. This time, Drozdenko claimed that air defense forces had shot down 7 drones over Kurishi, with debris causing a fire in an industrial zone that has subsequently been extinguished. The drones were almost certainly targeting the KINEF refinery, with footage of the massive fire suggesting that, whether by an actual strike or debris, the refinery had indeed been hit. Now, the March 2026 strike seemed to have done the most damage to the facility yet. and there's no sign Ukraine has any intention of stopping there. Why would it? The two facilities, along with the Volgograd refinery, are critical components in keeping the Russian war machine well-oiled and moving. Regular strikes on these facilities degrade Russia's ability to keep producing specialized and important equipment, which is entirely necessary for it to keep waging war. Of course, Ukraine strikes aren't just limited to these facilities. In the Baltic area alone, Ukraine hit numerous other targets that disrupted Russian military and civilian operations during the same week as the latest KINEF and YANOS strikes. Pulkovo Airport, the second largest in Russia and the primary international airport serving St. Petersburg, was forced to suspend flights for the umpteenth time during the March 26 attacks. The previous night, on March 24-25, Ukrainian drones hit the Novatek gas processing complex at Ust-Luga port, with both the Security Service of Ukraine and Special Operations Forces claiming responsibility. That operation followed a drone strike on the Primorsk oil terminal on March 22-23, where a fuel depot was set on fire. Ukrainian officials have described these coordinated attacks as part of a sustained effort to target export infrastructure that generates revenue for Russia's war effort and supports global shipments of oil and gas products. The strikes on Russian energy infrastructure have been appropriately nicknamed Kinetic sanctions, and they hurt. The disruption to Russia's exports and the pandemonium caused in Russian society by disruptions to travel undoubtedly impact Russia's ability to wage war and to keep the population on side supporting the war in general. But the strikes on the three main facilities that keep its military lubricated hurt even more. The damaged refining units, such as primary distillation and catalytic crackers, reduced the output of military-grade fuels. The March 2026 KINEF strike alone cut off over 6% of Russia's refining capacity and disrupted supply to northwest Russia for an indefinite period. Crucially, the strikes also disrupted supplies to the occupied territories inside Ukraine, slowing down and in some cases seemingly halting the faltering Russian spring offensive. These refinery attacks, along with many others, have disabled anywhere from 15 to 40% of Russia's refining capacity at different times, forcing Moscow to instead cut fuel exports and use reserves to meet domestic demand, particularly to fuel its military. The reduced oil revenue obviously hits Putin's ability to fund the war hard, but it also causes local fuel prices to rise, fueling public discontent. And it's forced Russia to go on the defensive. The strikes on refineries deeper inside Russia have forced Putin to reallocate his relatively limited air defense resources to protect them. Russia has even been forced to call up reservists to man these systems. More air defense systems in the interior means less available on the battlefield, a clear advantage for Ukraine. But most importantly, the longer these refineries stay offline, the greater the pressure on the working parts of the machines that drive Russia's war machine. Putin simply can't afford to keep sending tanks, armored vehicles, air defense systems, and even his air force into battle if the oil needed to drive and lubricate them isn't available. The more Ukraine strikes these refineries, the more it fundamentally weakens Russia's ability to continue waging war against it. It seems a no-brainer for Ukraine to keep hammering them, unless their allies can persuade them not to. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has already suggested that some partners have begun leaning on him to reduce the intensity of Ukraine's strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. The reason, of course, has nothing to do with any sympathy for Russia. Oil supplies are running low around the world as a result of the Straits of Hormuz impasse. Grudgingly, Western nations have been forced to allow Russian oil back onto the market temporarily to maintain stability across the global economy by preventing oil prices from skyrocketing even further. Ukraine may be compelled to hold off on further strikes for a while, and not just for these diplomatic reasons. In time, elevated oil prices will undoubtedly come home to roost in Ukraine as well as everywhere else. But if the supply shock doesn't last for too much longer, we can fully expect to see more oily fireballs lighting up Russian skies, especially at these three refineries so crucial for Russia's military. That is, if Zelensky heeds his allies' calls to slow down with these strikes in the first place. Even if he does, Ukraine has plenty of other tricks up its sleeve. Check out this video about a genius new strategy that could also end the war in Ukraine's favor. Thanks for watching.